All right, yesterday we talked about quadrilaterals, and remember, quad is a prefix that means four, lateral means line. So these are shapes that are made of four line segments. And remember what we can call them. And here's my little quadrilateral family tree. And you should remember that a square, we can call a square a rhombus, we can call it a rectangle, we can call it a parallelogram, and we can call it a quadrilateral. We can also call it a polygon. Then we had rectangles. Rectangles, we can only call them parallelograms and quadrilaterals. We can't call a rectangle rhombus, and we can't call a rectangle a square. All squares can be called rectangles, but not all rectangles can be called squares. Okay? We also talked about rhombuses or rhombi. We can call it a rhombus, we can call it a parallelogram, or we can call it a quadrilateral and a polygon. Okay? And then we had the parallelogram. Parallelograms mean that all sides are parallel. Well, that's the reason why we can call a rectangle a parallelogram, a square a parallelogram, and a rhombus a parallelogram. But we can't call this actual parallelogram a square, a rhombus, or a rectangle. It's just a parallelogram. Okay? And then we had this branch of the family tree where we had trapezoids. And there's a difference. The main difference between these quadrilaterals and these quadrilaterals is that these have two pairs of parallel lines, and trapezoids only have one pair of parallel lines. Okay? So, yesterday we talked in depth about all of these. And today I want to talk about three more things. And then we can go back to looking at each shape, because it's very important that you understand the differences between these polygons, these quadrilaterals. All right, this first thing, what are parallel lines? Parallel lines are lines that never meet. So, these are parallel lines. These are parallel lines. These are parallel lines. Okay? So, if I had a square and I drew the lines here and here, those lines would never meet. Same thing if I drew a square and I drew the lines here and here, they're parallel because they never meet. So parallel lines are lines that run next to one another, but they never meet. So think about a ladder, think about railroad tracks, think about the lines on the wall. They never meet. So two lines that never meet are parallel. Now, if I had this line here, these lines are not parallel because eventually they would run into one another. When they run into one another, they're called intersecting lines. So parallel lines never touch one another. Intersecting lines will eventually touch one another. Okay? And I'll explain on this about when they touch. Okay? All right. Draw an example of a right angle. Well, I told you yesterday and the day before, a right angle is actually like the corner of a sheet of paper. So a right angle is straight up at what we call 90 degrees. And this is not degrees temperature. This is just degrees. All right. So a right angle could be this, just turned. Okay? A right angle could be this, just turned. The way that I like to tell if it's a right angle is to take a sheet of paper and hold it up to the right angle and see if it forms a corner. If it forms a corner like the sheet of paper, guess what? It's a right angle. Now, draw an example of an angle that is less than a right angle. Well, a less than a right angle is what we call an acute angle. This would be an acute angle. This would be an acute angle. So if it's less than 90, a right angle, it's kind of skinny. It kind of goes and gets narrower and narrower and narrower. Then we have the opposite, more than a right angle. We call this obtuse. And that means it's wide and fat, just like me. So it's wide and fat, okay? So if I took a corner, if I drew this angle, kind of looks like a right angle, doesn't it? But if I take my paper and I put it right here, that's not a right angle. It's less than a right angle, so it's an acute angle, okay? Now, I want to look at each one of these and talk about why in the world some of these lines are parallel and some of them are not. I'm going to start with the trapezoid. They only have one pair of parallel lines. This trapezoid's parallel lines are right here. Those two lines are never going to meet. But these two lines, if I continue, they're eventually going to meet. So that's the reason why they have one pair, and the pair there are two pairs of parallel lines. Over here, this line and this line, they never meet. They're parallel. That's one pair. But this line, this line, all right, come on now. This line and this line, eventually they're going to meet. So that's not parallel. So trapezoids only have one pair of parallel lines. The rest of these have two pairs of parallel lines, and that's the reason why we call them parallelograms. So for example, these two lines will never meet. They're parallel. These two lines are parallel. They'll never meet. The rhombus. These two lines are parallel. They'll never meet. These two lines, parallel. They'll never meet. The rectangle. Those two. Square. Those two. So those lines, that's the reason why all of these are parallelograms. And these are just trapezoids.